You're listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast, a podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. And welcome back to the Renegade Blitz podcast. I'm Ty Polk, joined as always by Chris Ward. Excited to finally get back to football and cover this week's Keystone State showdown between the Steelers and the Philadelphia Eagles. With the announcement of no attendance at Heinz Field for the first two games of the season, many felt that the earliest opportunity for them to attend was this matchup against the Eagles on October 11th. Those statements were ultimately correct. On October 6th, the Pennsylvania Department of Health and Governor Tom Wolf announced an increase on the attendance of events both indoor and outdoor. This paved the way for an announcement from team president Art Rooney II. The Steelers are allowing 5,500 people into Heinz Field for this contest. The seats are in the lower bowl of Heinz Field. Priority is to season ticket holders who did not opt out this season. Social distancing and masks are required, with more details to be announced prior to kickoff. Chris, you covered this on RenegadeBlitz.com. What are your thoughts on this announcement?
Yeah, I think it's great that the Pennsylvania Department of Health finally gave the approval to the Steelers to host fans at Heinz Field. I think it was the right decision made. Like last week, Rooney too said that, across the street at Rivers Casino, they have, over 1,000 people there, and that's indoors. Why can't we spread out people in a large stadium and have, the max is 7,500 people, but the Steelers are going to limit that down because you have to include like players and coaches and team personnel. So it's going to be approximately 5,500 fans at the game. So it'll just be nice to see fans at the game for the first time this season at Heinz Field. It's been weird without fans, and it's still not going to be the same. But it's just good to see some diehard Steeler fans waving terrible towels for the first time this season.
Yeah, 5,500 in the lower bowl. So we've seen plenty of other teams put fans in their stadiums, but they're a little bit more spread out. It's interesting how the Steelers are limiting it to the lower bowl. I guess maybe to give an appearance on television that, hey, we have proof there truly are here, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely should be interesting to see, how that arrangement looks and everything.
As we come out of this unexpected bye week, here's how the team looks compared to the rest of the league. The Steelers at 3-0 are one of 6 teams still undefeated this season, and by winning percentage are atop the AFC North. The team is 12th in points scored per game at 26.7, 5th in points allowed per game at 9.3. Their takeaway differential is +2, 3 giveaways and 5 takeaways, good enough for 8th in the league. Passing yards per game, 242 yards, it's 19th in the league. Rushing yards per game is 139, good enough for 8th in the league. Pass yards allowed per game, 236, that's 12th in the league. And they are first in rushing yards allowed at 54 yards a game. Chris, what are your thoughts on the Steelers' start this season, and what are you looking forward to as the Steelers embark on the next 13 weeks of the season?
Yeah, I mean, so far they're off to a good start this season, going 3-0. They kind of had their plans. A wrench was thrown into it with the Titans having a COVID-19 outbreak, and the Steelers having an unexpected bye. So now, including their game against the Broncos and the Texans, they'll have 4 straight games at Heinz Field with this Sunday against the Eagles, and then hosting the Browns on October 18th. So these 2 big games coming up here for the Steelers, and then after that is going to be really their toughest test in the entire season, because they're going to have to play the Titans on the road and then the Ravens on the road, who will be coming off a bye week. And that's, a tough place always to play in Baltimore. And then you got to go on the road to Dallas. So I think that's going to be a real key part of the season, I think, is that 3 game stretch of being on the road.
What do you think is key for the Steelers to improve on in the next 13 weeks? It's been all in all a pretty good start, but there's some things that you see the team and you watch them and you go, it's pretty good how everything's gone out. You can't really ask for anything better than a 3-0 start, but there are some things that they can improve.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the defense, they're doing everything, what they need to do right now as far as getting sacks and quarterback pressures and quarterback hits. They're dominating and stopping the run right now. Probably the only area you really want to see them get better is the pass defense. They've given up too many yards to some of the quarterbacks that they played so far. So on defense, you want to see that more. Maybe a little bit more turnovers. But you want to see Fitzpatrick get in there and get some of those game-changing plays that he got like last year. But and then offense, they just need to be more consistent. With Ben getting more repertoire with his receivers. And then the running backs just rushed over 100 yards in each of their first 3 games. Benny Snell rushing over 100 in the first game against the Giants, and then James Conner having back-to-back 100-plus yard performances against the Broncos and the Texans. So the run game, they're getting the job done. They're controlling the clock, especially in the fourth quarter. You just want to, as far as Benny Snell, you want to get to see him fix up those fumbles and hold on to the ball better. But the receivers, all top 4 receivers, you go down the list, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, James Washington and Chase Claypool, they've all made big plays in the first 3 games. And I'll definitely be interested to see Claypool, build off of his first 3 games. Because you think about it, each game he's had a real big play.
With last week's COVID cancellation and the sleuthing for guests by my co-host this week, we scheduled 2 interviews to talk about the Eagles. One to give a fan perspective and another to cover the team in a more analytical approach. With the rarity of this matchup, the last time these 2 teams played was in 2016 in Philadelphia, and the last time in Pittsburgh was 2012. We'll talk to E.J. Smith of the Philadelphia Inquirer and Jon Marks, sports talk host on Philadelphia Sports Radio 94 WIP. And we welcome Jon Marks of the Marks and Reese Show on Sports Radio 94 WIP in Philadelphia. Jon, welcome to the show.
What's up, dude? Normally I don't play nice with Steeler fans, so we'll see how this goes today. But I love the cross-state rivalry. I have a lot of friends that came to college in Philly that are Steeler fans, and it's always fun football season, that's for sure.
Well, one thing we want to start off, it's obvious you've heard that Heinz Field is going to have fans in the stands this weekend. Is there excitement about the Eagles having fans at games in the Link?
I think it's good, right? I don't know how much it would affect. Like in Philly, I think they're going to cap it at 7,500. So like, what difference would that make as far as like home field advantage? I don't think it makes much of a difference, but I mean, it kind of just signals that we're coming back from this. We can get some fans in the stands, and there's a lot of Steelers fans, a lot of Eagles fans that they live and die with going to games on Sundays. And, I like going to an occasional game. I like sitting on my butt at home and watching Red Zone after, the game after or the game before or whatever. But, there's so many people that love going to the games. It's a part of their routine during football season. So it's cool that they're going back. But, as far as the home field advantage, I don't know what it would actually present, if any.
And Jon, the Eagles are remarkably in first place in the NFC East right now with a 1-2-1 record. After that Bengals tie, I saw the Eagle fans in the media. They were it was like the world was ending. It felt like. But what is the reaction of people around Philadelphia been to the slow start and yet somehow leading the division?
Predictable. The reaction has been predictable. To start with what you were saying about the punt, Doug Peterson punts instead of going for it on 4th and 12 or trying to kick I think it was a 64-yard field goal. You miss that, you give the Bengals enough time. They have the ball on the other side of the 50-yard line. They need one play to get 10 yards, and then they can kick a field goal. I actually agreed with the decision just because the way that game was going and how bad the Eagles were up until that point, I feel like they were going to lose the game. So I would rather have the tie for this reason that we're talking about right now. It could put them in first place. So, that's that. The reaction was negative, predictable. After winning the Super Bowl in 2017, this really wasn't a build. Like when you think about the Chiefs, or you even think about, the Steelers, normally you draft players, you grow with them, you add some free agents, and then that's how you win a Super Bowl. It wasn't like that for the Eagles. They drafted Carson Wentz his second year in the league. They go on a run. He goes 11-2 as a starter. They had a lot of just kind of one-year contract mercenaries that came in and really contributed to. So I guess the answer is that it wasn't a traditional build to where when you win a Super Bowl, you think you're coming back for more, or at least you're going to get close again. And even though they went 9-7 the last 2 years after the Super Bowl, there wasn't a real feel that it was a true championship contender. So this year, people were kind of in between. Carson Wentz was supposed to come back and play better, and they had some young players, but they certainly weren't all in going for the Super Bowl. But no one expected this kind of a start to a season. So it's been disappointing. But at the same time, it's like, you look at what this division is right now, and you could arguably, they're in first place right now. And if you're able to beat the Cowboys, who have been god awful on defense, if you're able to beat them and win your division games, you should win the division. But overall, it's been a disappointing start to the season. When you start the season going 0-2-1, no one's going to like that. They got the win last week. So the problem is now they have a tough schedule coming up. So Steelers, obviously, this week, the Ravens the following week. So you got to try to get a win the next 2 weeks. But, it's been a rough start, and I don't know if it's going to get better in the next couple weeks.
Well, John, which side of the ball is more to blame for their poor start, the offense or the defense?
Good question. Early, it was the defense, right? The Redskins game, you can kind of put on the quarterback, and then the defense going to get a stop in the second half. The defense played really well last week, played really well against the Bengals, and I think that's more or less an indication of how bad that Nick Mullins was for the 49ers. Like, if the 49ers have Jimmy Garoppolo, do they lose that game? Probably not, right? Like, he had unforced errors. He was getting sacked. He was bad. I mean, so bad that they brought in C.J. Beathard, who actually rallied him late in the fourth quarter. But, I think it comes down to this. Bad quarterback play, spotty defense, and then we'll talk about the head coach, Doug Peterson. He's more or less your offensive coordinator. So he came out kind of with mind-numbing game plans the first 2 weeks of the season. You had bad offensive line play because you've had a bunch of injuries on the offensive line, so you have backups or young players in there. And they're treating Carson Wentz like a pocket passer, which he's not anyway. So you have him sitting back there. He's getting, they had 8 sacks, gave up 8 sacks against the Redskins. He's holding the ball too long. So it really has been a mixed bag of who you can blame. But I always look at quarterback play. This is the NFL. They make $30 million a year for a reason. And Carson Wentz has not been good this year. So Carson Wentz, for me, it would be the primary reason, along with defense and some other things.
If there was one thing that encompassed the start of the Eagles season, it was Carson Wentz getting booed when no one's in the stadium.
Yeah, well, so that's done by the TV networks. That wasn't done by the Eagles, right? Because that's a discussion we had the following day on our show on WIP, and it was like, well, why the hell would the Eagles want to boo their own players? We know the fans boo their own players. Believe me, we know that naturally everybody says that we boo our own players, and I know we do. But yeah, how ironic that the TV broadcast is booing Carson Wentz. And you know what, man? If there would have been fans in the stands, he would have gotten a lot worse than that, because his play against the Bengals, his play in some of the other games was downright bad. It was.
Yeah, and John, speaking of Carson Wentz, he had that incredible season, and since then just injuries and just overall worse play going on. And for this season, he started the season with 2 interceptions in each of his first 3 games. So like, how important was that for him to get that win against the 49ers? And even before that, there was some talk about maybe possibly Jalen Hurts getting the start at quarterback.
Yeah, it was really important. And, he had 7 interceptions in each of the last 3 seasons for the season. So to start the year with 6 interceptions, and sometimes you get interceptions where it's like, all right, well, that's not necessarily on the quarterback. The ball was tipped at the line, just bad luck. No, man, his interceptions were bad. They were bad decisions by the quarterback. So he has been really, really bad. And, I think you saw a spark of Carson Wentz in the 49ers game, even though they were missing some of their good starters. Bosa was out. Thomas was out. They didn't have their starting quarterback. You saw some life from him, and you saw it with backup players, right? Like he was playing with practice squad wide receivers. The Eagles aren't the Steelers. They can't draft wide receivers in the 5th, 6th round and develop into good players. So he's out there more or less with guys that have no experience. They rallied around him, and Carson made plays with his legs that set up favorable games, right? So you're not going to be able to live and die like that for 16 games because he'll never last taking a beating. He took a pounding, man. But for this game, he was able to get it done and get a win. As far as your question with Jalen Hurts, listen, I'm not going to tell you that if they were 0-5-1 or they're like 1-9, I'm not going to tell you that they wouldn't make a move to bring in Jalen Hurts because normally you can't lose that many games and there not be a problem or a replacement at quarterback. But the Eagles just signed him to a $108 million contract. The minute you put Jalen Hurts in a game is the minute that now you really have a quarterback controversy, and you're telling Carson Wentz like, yo, dude, like we don't know about you, right? It's too early into this contract to feel like that about Carson Wentz. You got to get better around him. You got to get him better before you put Jalen Hurts in there. And even when they put Hurts in for kind of gadget plays, for slash plays, since I'm talking to a Pittsburgh podcast here, like I don't even want that because the better that Jalen Hurts does, the more people are going to want him in the game more, and I don't want that. If you're going to win, it's going to have to be with Carson Wentz as your starting quarterback having success.
Well, John, as I told you a little bit before the podcast started, I've always admired the Philadelphia Eagles. I used to get picked on by some of my family members for liking Donovan McNabb, and I remember seeing a lot of the receiving corps he had prior to Terrell Owens and really alongside Deshaun Jackson a little bit. Guys like Freddie Mitchell, James Thrash, and Todd Pinkston were more fit to be complementary guys than reliable targets. And speaking of reliable targets, it was more Brian Westbrook and sometimes Chad Lewis, LJ Smith. And again, with the injury bug the Eagles have been going through, really, they don't have Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson. They have to rely on Travis Fulgham and guys like Greg Ward. Is there a concern that one of the reasons why Carson is not exactly doing well is the fact that he doesn't have healthy weapons out there?
Yeah, hell yeah, it's a concern, right? Like, for example, look at the Dallas Cowboys. And the Dallas Cowboys suck this year, right? And a lot of their offensive points and yards are coming in garbage time. But look what they did. As much crap as Jerry Jones gets, they traded a first-round draft pick for Amari Cooper. They used the first-round draft pick on CeeDee Lamb. Michael Gallup, I believe, is a third-round draft pick. He can play. Ezekiel Elliott's a top-5 pick, right? So they're giving him weapons. A young quarterback, Dak Prescott, drafted in the same draft, giving him weapons to use. Look what Arizona did for Kyler Murray this year, right? They went out and they traded, and somehow they were able to get DeAndre Hopkins, and they got rid of an overpriced running back in return for a second-round draft pick. Josh Allen needs to be developed as a passer. What do? Stephon Diggs gave up a first-round draft pick. Meanwhile, what did the Eagles do? Now, they used the first-round draft pick on Jalen Reagor, which was, I believe, a good pick, and they spent money on Deshaun Jackson before. But for the most part, like you said, we're right back into practice squad guys with him. So you have two tight ends that are pretty good. You have some practice squad guys out. Now, Miles Sanders is I like him. He's a good running back. He's not a star. So if you want him to properly develop and not press and not have to do everything by himself, because that's where Carson Wentz runs into a problem, is when he feels like he's got to do everything. That is not a winning formula in the NFL. You got to give him guys to play with. And Howie Roseman, the GM of the Eagles, they failed. They have. And going forward, they have to say, like, you know what? Let's overdo it on weapons to Carson Wentz. Because if you're going to win, it's not going to be with Greg Ward. It's not going to be with Fulgham. It's not going to be with practice squad guys. You need to draft. You need to develop. And if that's not working, you need to sign free agents, and they have to work.
Well, real quick here, there is an available wide receiver as a free agent right now. It's actually a part of the opponents you guys just faced, Mohamed Sanu. And of course, if you guys want to go down that rabbit hole, you got AB, Mr. Big Chest. I mean, why not? Let it fly.
Yeah, no and no. I would rather develop some of these young guys and see if they can play. Here's reality. Even if they win the division this year, like, what are they really doing, right? Are they winning a playoff game? I mean, maybe best case. They're not contending for a Super Bowl this year. There's too many good teams in the NFC. So while you don't want to leave Carson Wentz hanging out to dry with nothing, I also want to see what these young receivers have. Alshon Jeffrey is going to be back in a week or two, maybe even this week. Deshaun Jackson might be back this week. I just don't know what Sanu has left. And if it's at the expense of what some of these young guys can do, I don't know if I want it. And then AB. Man, is he a talent. You guys know that. He's also a major pain in the ass, which we've already had enough problems here in the locker room with players not liking Carson Wentz and there being a chemistry issue. I don't know if I would do that with Antonio Brown. As good as he is, if this team was in a better spot, like if we're talking about they're a player away and they're a wide receiver away from making noise in the NFC, I would consider it. But at this point, with where this team is right now, I would not.
And just speaking of those injuries, like I don't think any team in the league right now suffers the amount of injuries that the Eagles have. So, like, what has the message been from Doug Peterson? Is he just kind of like taking that like next man up approach? And what's the feeling been around for the locker room?
Yeah, I mean, what else can you do? He was asked. Our morning show host on WIP asked him a question. He comes on after the games in the morning, and they asked him a question about like Fulgham, like, did he have confidence to put him in, and et cetera, et cetera. And Doug Peterson responded saying like, well, who else did you want me to put in at that point, right? Like, he doesn't have enough bodies, right? So now the offensive line's banged up. You're putting in guys that Jordan Mailata is going to be starting left tackle on Sunday. He was a rugby player 3 years ago, and he literally played in his first real time on Sunday, did a pretty good job, right? But he wasn't facing the Steelers front, right? He wasn't facing Blitzburg. So, at this point, he's going to go with the guys that he has. And, he's answering questions saying, sure, I got confidence in these guys. What else is he supposed to say, right? So it's unbelievable the amount of injuries that they've had, not just this year, last year, 2018, 2017, the year that they won the Super Bowl. They lost their starting quarterback, Carson Wentz. They lost a future Hall of Fame left tackle, Jason Peters. They lost Darren Sproles, the season-ending injury. So I don't know what's going on with these injuries. They tried to, they brought in a new medical staff. They brought in some new trainers, et cetera. But whatever they're doing, it's still not working because guys are going down left and right.
Well, that's another guy I wanted to talk about, Mailata. What are the Eagles going to do against this pass rush? Because Mailata is a great story, but against really, we've seen this defensive line with the Steelers. It's like you got Cam Hayward, Stephon Tuitt stepped up in the last game. You also have Tyson Alualu, who came out of nowhere. It's kind of a little bit of the 3-4 version of Philadelphia with a defensive line, and then you have the linebackers. It's just, how are they going to attack these guys?
Yeah, it's trouble. It's trouble. Like you're asking a question that I don't know if the Eagles have an answer to, right? Helping out with tight ends, getting the ball out of his hand quick, right? Like a lot of short throws. That's really the only thing you can do because as well as he played, and I have Brian Baldinger of the NFL Network on my show on Wednesdays, and he breaks it down, especially offensive line play because he's a former offensive lineman, and he was very impressed with how Jordan Mailata looked in his first start. He said he played really well, but that was last week. That's not this week. So if you're Pittsburgh and you're their defense, what are you going to do? You're looking at Mailata, you have him circled, and we're saying we're going to try to confuse him. We're going to run stunts. We're going to do everything that we can to expose him, right? So do I think it's going to be easy? No. And the same thing with the Eagles. They're going to do everything they can to try to protect him and protect Carson Wentz. But listen, if they can get out of Sunday's game with Carson Wentz being upright for most of the game, that's a victory, man. I mean, the only thing you can't have, you can't have the pass rush win the game for the Steelers. You have to do everything you can to try to eliminate that. Everything else is, that's the main thing they have to do.
Well, I want to be fair to the Eagles' offensive line. If I'm recalling correctly, they only gave up one sack with the Rams. And they have Aaron Donald, which is the consensus best defensive player in the league. So they're certainly able to do some things right. It's just a little nerving to see a guy from Australia who's playing rugby just come out there and say, hey, here's the best pass rushing duo in the league. Good luck.
Yeah, he didn't play against the Rams. Jason Peters was still in there for that, and that was a weird game because that was coming off of the Washington Redskins just pounding Carson Wentz all afternoon long in the opener, 8 sacks. So everybody's thinking, all right, now you're facing the Rams and Aaron Donald, the best defensive player in football. This is going to be a bloodbath. And meanwhile, Donald didn't do anything. They only had 3 quarterback hits on Carson Wentz the entire day. Now, I think that was helped out with getting the ball out of his hands quicker, et cetera. But honestly, I don't know what you're going to see out of the offensive line because just whenever you count this team out, the Eagles, and you think that they're done, they come up with a surprising performance. But, I mean, just common sense would tell you that it's going to be a tough go for the Eagles offensive line on Sunday.
And John, obviously Zach Ertz is a huge part of the offense and a key target for Wentz. Ertz is probably, he's definitely a top 3 tight end in the league. Has there been any talks about his contract, or are they going to wait till after the season to address that?
Oh, there's been a lot of talk about the contract, and he came out before, like the Thursday before the opener. He came out, and man, he got everything off his chest. He doesn't feel like the feeling's mutual. He doesn't feel like the team wants him back. He was like disrespected by the offer they were giving him. Zach Ertz has 2 years left on his contract, right? So it's not normal that a Pro Bowl player type goes into the final year of his contract. I guess he doesn't like where negotiations are at this point. Zach Ertz is 30 years old. So the Eagles also have Dallas Goddard. He's injured right now, but they used a second-round draft pick on him a few years ago. And he actually looks like he may be better than Zach Ertz right now. So, I mean, if you read the tea leaves, it seems like that the Eagles would like to have Zach Ertz back, but would like to have him back at their number, not his number. And, you said he's probably the 3rd best tight end in the league. I would disagree with that. And it's nothing against Zach Ertz. I like Zach Ertz. He was a big part of winning a Super Bowl. But at this point, Darren Waller's probably better. Mark Andrews is probably better. Not saying that Zach Ertz isn't a good tight end still, and he can be very valuable, but I don't know how much of a difference maker he can be unless you have a very good team around them, because the reality is with no wide receivers, now the defense can key on him more, and he's not having as much success. I think he had 9 yards and 4 catches last week. For Zach Ertz, would he be, if he went to a good team like the Steelers or the Patriots, yeah, he would look a lot better. But I wonder if there's some chemistry issues. I wonder if he wasn't kind of moping around out there, Zach Ertz, early in the season. So it's something to watch, but it's definitely not. Anytime one of your players is unhappy and he's letting it be known as he's unhappy, that's a problem. You guys know that from Le'Veon Bell and AB. It never works out well.
I actually read something that he got into a little bit of spat with GM Howie Roseman out there, so I'm hoping, at least for him, it's not really affecting his play.
Yeah, I think that it was early, like you said. The week lead up to the first game, he was seen having a shouting match with the GM at practice. So that's trouble. That's trouble. When guys are unhappy, like the Eagles could pay them and make them happy. They're electing not to do that, and I think that tells you a lot of where they are right now.
And with Steelers versus Eagles, it seems that the matchups come every election cycle. The last matchup was in 2016 in Philadelphia. The Eagles won 31-3. The last time in Pittsburgh was a 16-12 victory. The record all time for Steelers versus Eagles is 48-28 Philadelphia. And so I'm just interested to hear what Eagles fans think about the Steelers. Do they view this in a rivalry? It's obviously not in the same breath as Pens versus Flyers, but it's one of the reasons why I actually like the team.
Yeah, so I can speak for me, and our show on Friday will probably be a lot of Steelers, Pittsburgh, Philly, Eagles, right? Because you mentioned it, like the Flyers-Penguins rivalry is probably, certainly for the Flyers, that's the biggest rivalry, and I believe it's for the Penguins too. But like me, because of friends from Pittsburgh, because of 6 rings, 6 Super Bowl rings, and the Eagles didn't get one until recently. It's like I really love the Pittsburgh-Philly rivalry because I know you guys, for the most part, hate us in Philly, like sports hate. It's a good sports hate. So, it's a great rivalry, and It's unfortunate that we don't get to play more often, but I know that I'm going to be having a lot of Stiller hate coming up on Thursday, Friday, and then leading into the game on Sunday. It'll be cool.
Well, there's always been a couple inklings of a potential Pennsylvania Super Bowl. It happened in 2001, 2004, and 2008, at least in my lifetime. And at times, at least here in Pittsburgh, it was kind of like, yeah, if this happens, wherever the Super Bowl is, just move it to Happy Valley.
Yep. Yeah, I think Chris Berman for like 5 straight years predicted the Steelers and the Eagles in a Super Bowl. So it was always something that Berman was always a big fan of both teams. So it was always something that you wondered, could it happen? And at some point it's got to happen because the Steelers are always a very good franchise, and the Eagles, for the most part, for the last 20 years, have been a franchise that, at least has a shot and is well run. So that would be so cool if it was. God, what would Super Bowl week look like with a bunch of Steelers and Eagles fans at the Super Bowl? It would be ugly. It'd be awesome.
It'd be Flyers versus Penguins, people fighting in streets. The stadium would be it would be a bloodbath, but it'd be civil probably in the first half, but once it starts getting down to crunch time, someone's getting hurt.
Yeah, one of my favorite guests to bring on, and I'm not a big hockey guy, but one of my favorite guests to bring on when the Flyers are good and the Flyers and Penguins are playing is Matthew Barnaby, because Flyers fans hate him so much. And we'll go over some of the old fights that he had with Eric Lindros, and he was like the perfect agitator in a couple of the teams that he played for. So he plays right into the hands of Philly fans that hate the Pittsburgh guys like Matt Barnaby.
So John, what is your biggest concern for the Eagles heading into this game against the Steelers, and who needs to step up for Philadelphia?
O-line, you guys talked about the defensive line kind of in the same category as what the Steelers have, and frankly, they've beaten up on some bad offensive lines, and give them credit for taking advantage of it. But I want to see what they do against good teams. I don't want to see what they're doing against, the Bengals offensive line isn't very good. You're facing a backup quarterback in Nick Mullins, and their offensive line's a little bit banged up in San Francisco. So I want to see what they do against some of the better competition in the league. So defensive line, the offensive line, guys, you're just hanging on for dear life at this point, hoping that they can get you through the game with Carson Wentz, with keeping him out. And, I wonder how fair it is to put on Carson Wentz the expectations of go out and win a game when you have practice squad wide receivers and you have an offensive line like they have. But ultimately in the NFL, it's a quarterback league, and he's got to play better than he's been playing. So if Carson Wentz can step up and they can keep him clean, they can win this game. But that's a tall task to even put that expectation on him.
Okay, John, so we've been kind of striking out with a couple of our guests in terms of getting predictions. We've had a Texas TV reporter, a lot of guys that are going real close to the vest here. So I got to know, what's your prediction for this Steelers versus Eagles clash?
Well, it's only Wednesday, so we're taping this on a Wednesday, so it's tough to get the real feel for how I feel on Friday, because I think once you get closer to Friday, as a fan, you kind of talk yourself into your team winning, right? Like Wednesday, you're still like, well, how are they going to win? And then by Friday, you've talked yourself into it. But what I'll probably say on Friday is that the Eagles keep it close, but ultimately they don't have enough to win. So I know the point spread is 7, so every prediction I get is because we do picks based on the line. So I'll go 26-22. Steelers win. Eagles have a chance in the fourth, but it's just not enough, and the Steelers ultimately get the victory. But you kind of leave the game as an Eagle fan feeling, even though you're 1-3-1, feeling like, all right, that wasn't too bad. So that's my prediction.
Well, do you guys feel confident this year with an extra playoff team? It seems like, and obviously there's a division winner, but so you guys got to at least feel confident that somehow you guys can, at the very least, back into a playoff spot in what people call the NFC least.
No, there's not a whole lot of confidence regarding that. I think on Tuesday on my show, I was saying that I feel better about their chances just because, like you said, the NFC least, but ultimately they have they have the toughest schedule in the NFL coming down for the rest of the season. And Cowboys have a tough schedule, but not as tough as the Eagles. So they're playing a first place schedule. So that's a difference than some of the other teams that they'll be competing with. So I feel like the only way they make the playoffs is as the division winner. And that might be 7-8-1. Look at the Cowboys schedule. If they can't turn it around on defense, they don't have a lot of wins on their schedule too. So not a lot of confidence, but hey, they're in first place right now. So like, who the hell knows? Why not?
And that's Jon Marks, the Marks and Reese Show on Sports Radio 94 WIP in Philadelphia. Jon, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, guys, thank you. And we'll see what happens on Sunday, but I enjoyed it, and hopefully we can talk soon.
All right, and that was part one of our podcast covering the Philadelphia Eagles this week for the Renegade Blitz. For Chris Ward, I'm Ty Polk. Thank you, and please tune in for part two with E.J. Smith of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. Our podcasts are available on YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify.